The Adirondack Park in upstate New York is not like other wilderness areas in the United States, spanning over 6 million acres. It is the largest publicly protected area in the contiguous United States, greater in size than Yellowstone, Yosemite, Glacier, and the Grand Canyon combined. It is a sprawling, ancient landscape of dense boreal forests, deep glacial lakes, and rugged mountains. For generations, it has been a premier destination for outdoorsmen, a place where families pass down hunting camps and traditions from father to son. But the sheer scale of the Adirondacks hides a more unforgiving reality. It is a landscape that can swallow a person whole without leaving a single trace behind. The woods are indifferent to experience, indifferent to preparation, and, as one hunting party learned in the late autumn of 2015, capable of impossibilities that defy all logic and reason. November in the Adirondacks is a time of transition. The vibrant colors of autumn have long since fallen, leaving behind a stark, gray landscape of bare branches and a thick, dry carpet of dead leaves. The air carries a biting chill, a constant reminder that the brutal northeastern winter is only weeks or sometimes days away. It was in this environment, on November 15, 2015, that an 82-year-old man named Thomas Messick ventured into the woods near Brant Lake in the town of Horicon. Thomas was not a novice. He was an incredibly experienced outdoorsman who'd been hunting these exact woods for over 6 decades. He knew the terrain intimately. Beyond his local knowledge, Thomas was a man of remarkable fortitude. He was a former paratrooper who had served with the 82nd Airborne Division. Even in his 80s, he maintained a quiet, disciplined toughness. However, age had inevitably taken its toll. He suffered from minor heart issues, had limited vision in one eye, and his hearing was not what it used to be. Most importantly, his mobility was restricted. He was not a man capable of hiking miles over rough terrain, nor could he move swiftly through the dense, tangled underbrush of the deep woods. Because of these physical limitations, his hunting party always made sure he was positioned in the safest, most accessible spots. The hunting party that day consisted of 7 men. It was a tight-knit group of family and close friends, including Thomas's own son. They operated with the synchronized efficiency of men who had hunted together for years. On this particular Sunday, they decided to execute a classic hunting maneuver known as a deer drive. To understand the baffling nature of what was about to happen, it is crucial to understand exactly how a deer drive works and the precise geometry of the hunters in the woods. In a deer drive, a hunting party splits into 2 groups, the drivers and the watchers. The watchers are positioned in a line along a known boundary, such as a ridge, a stream, or a trail. Their job is to remain absolutely stationary, perfectly quiet. Meanwhile, the drivers travel a mile or so away, form their own line, and begin walking slowly through the woods toward the watches. The goal is for the drivers to flush any deer resting in the thick brush, pushing them gently toward the stationary watches. It is a highly coordinated tactic that requires everyone to know exactly where everyone else is at all times. Safety depends on this spatial awareness. On the afternoon of November 15th, the group set up a drive near an area known as Lily Pond. The watchers were placed along an old, overgrown logging road. Thomas Messick was assigned to be one of the watchers. Because of his age and limited mobility, his son and friends made sure he was stationed in a highly accessible spot. They walked him to a specific tree on the edge of the logging road and told him to sit there and wait. He was dressed for the cold, wearing layers of warm clothing, a camouflage jacket, and a bright blaze orange hunting vest and hat, making him highly visible against the drab brown and gray of the November woods. He carried his hunting rifle at a 2-way radio. The placement of the watchers was incredibly tight. The man positioned directly to Thomas's right was only about 40 to 50 yards away. In the woods, 50 yards is nothing. It is a distance so short that you can easily see the bright orange safety gear of the person next to you. You can hear them shift their weight. You can hear them cough. The watcher to Thomas's left was similarly close. Thomas was effectively bracketed by his friends, sitting quietly on a logging road, waiting for the drivers to push through the brush. At approximately 1:30 in the afternoon, the drivers began their slow march through the woods. The environment that day was particularly noisy. It had been a dry autumn, and the forest floor was covered in a thick layer of crisp, dead leaves. Anyone who has spent time in the woods knows that walking on dry leaves sounds like walking on shattered glass. Every footstep echoes. Even a squirrel moving through the brush sounds like a large man. If a human being were to walk away or struggle or fall, the sound of the dry leaves would carry for hundreds of yards in the crisp autumn air. For the next hour, the drivers pushed methodically toward the logging road. The watchers sat in absolute silence, scanning the woods for movement. Nothing out of the ordinary occurred. There were no gunshots. There were no shouts over the radio. There was no sound of a struggle, no breaking branches, and no heavy footsteps retreating into the distance. Just the wind in the bare trees and the distant rhythmic crunch of the drivers slowly approaching. At around 2:30 p.m., the drive concluded. The drivers emerged from the brush onto the logging road, joining up with the watchers. They began to gather, checking in with one another, expecting to see Thomas sitting by his assigned tree, ready to head back to the hunting camp. But as the men converged on the spot where Thomas had been left just an hour earlier, they found an empty space. Thomas was not sitting by the tree. At first, there was no panic. In the woods, logic dictates the simplest explanation. The immediate assumption was that Thomas had grown cold, or perhaps needed to relieve himself, and had simply stepped off the trail for a moment. Or perhaps feeling stiff from sitting, he had decided to start the slow walk back toward the vehicles parked a short distance away. The men called out his name, expecting him to step out from behind a nearby pine tree. There was no answer. They clicked their two-way radios, asking Thomas to respond. The radios emitted only static. The men spread out slightly, walking up and down the logging road, looking for the bright blaze orange of his coat. They checked the brush immediately surrounding his assigned spot. They looked for footprints, for crushed leaves, for any sign of which direction he might have wandered. The ground revealed nothing. It was as if he had simply evaporated into the cold autumn air. Within minutes, the mild concern began to curdle into genuine anxiety. Thomas was an 82-year-old man with a bad heart and limited mobility. He was not the type of person to wander off without telling anyone, especially during a deer drive, which is a dangerous time to be moving unpredictably through the woods. His son and his friends began shouting his name, their voices echoing off the trees and fading into the vast, silent expanse of the Adirondacks. They fired signal shots into the air, a universal hunter's code meant to guide a lost person back to the group. 3 loud cracks from a high-powered rifle shattered the quiet of the afternoon. They waited, listening intently for a return shot. The silence that followed was absolute and deafening. Realizing that something was terribly wrong, the hunting party immediately contacted the authorities. Because they acted so quickly, the official search began within hours of Thomas being noticed missing. The New York State Department of Environmental Conservation, or DEC, dispatched forest rangers to the scene. These rangers are among the most elite search and rescue personnel in the country, specializing in the rugged, unforgiving terrain of the Adirondack Park. They arrived at the Lily Pond tract while there was still daylight, expecting to find an elderly man who had perhaps suffered a medical episode and collapsed nearby. The rangers began a hasty search. They started at the exact tree where Thomas had been sitting. They fanned out in a grid, moving methodically through the brush. They were looking for the obvious signs of a lost hunter: broken twigs, scuff marks on the ground, dropped equipment, or the unmistakable flash of blaze orange. They found absolutely nothing. As night fell, the temperature plummeted. The reality of the situation set in. An 82-year-old man was out in the freezing woods, somewhere in the dark. The search intensified the next morning. The DEC brought in specialized tracking dogs trained to follow the scent of the human being, even hours after they had passed through an area. The handlers brought the dogs to the spot where Thomas was last seen. They gave the dogs an article of Thomas's clothing to catch his scent. What happened next deeply unsettled the handlers and remains one of the most baffling aspects of the case. The highly trained tracking dogs sniffed the area around the tree. They circled the immediate vicinity, but they could not pick up a trail leading away from that spot. They didn't hit a scent and lose it a mile down the road. They simply found no scent trail leaving the area at all. It was as if Thomas had not walked away from the tree. The scope of the search exploded. Over the next several days, the quiet woods near Horicon were transformed into the staging ground for a massive, multi-agency operation. Hundreds of trained search and rescue volunteers, DEC rangers, state police, and specialized wilderness teams descended on the area. Helicopters equipped with advanced FLIR technology, forward-looking infrared, flew low over the canopy, scanning the ground for the heat signature of a human body. In the cold November environment, a human body, even a deceased one, would stand out clearly on the thermal monitors against the freezing ground. The helicopters flew grid after grid, day and night. They found deer. They found bears. They found nothing that resembled Thomas Messick. The terrain around Lily Pond is dotted with bogs, small bodies of water, and treacherous swamps. The authorities considered the very real possibility that Thomas had wandered off the trail, become disoriented, and fallen into the water. State police dive teams were brought in. Men in dry suits plunged into the freezing, murky waters of Lily Pond and surrounding bogs. They dragged the bottoms, feeling through the silt and sunken logs. They found no trace of the missing hunter. As the days dragged on, the nature of the mystery began to wear on the searchers. When a hunter goes missing, they almost always leave a trail of breadcrumbs. People who are lost, especially the elderly or those suffering from a medical emergency, tend to shed items. They drop their heavy rifle. They take off their bright orange hat. They sit down on a log to rest. But the searchers combing the woods found no rifle. They found no radio. They found no hat, no gloves, no wrapper from a piece of candy. The woods were entirely sterile of Thomas Messick's presence. And then the weather turned. On the third day of the search, a brutal early winter storm slammed into the Adirondack. High winds whipped through the bare trees, and heavy snow began to fall, quickly blanketing the forest floor. The temperature dropped into the teens. The snowstorm was a devastating blow to the search effort. It covered any potential tracks, buried any dropped items, and made the already treacherous terrain incredibly dangerous for the searchers themselves. It also sealed the grim reality that if Thomas was still out there, his chances of surviving the freezing temperatures were virtually zero. Despite the weather, the search pushed forward. It became one of the largest and most exhaustive search and rescue operations in the history of the Adirondack Park. The searchers formed long, tight lines, standing shoulder to shoulder, and walked miles through the dense brush, ensuring that not a single square foot of ground was missed. They checked under every deadfall, inside every hollow log, and beneath the dense roots of overturned trees. During this massive effort, a strange and quiet detail emerged that added a layer of deep unease to the investigation. The FBI was brought in to assist with the case. While federal assistance in missing persons cases is not unheard of, the rapid deployment of the FBI to a missing hunter case in the deep woods is highly unusual. The authorities began to quietly look into the possibility of foul play. They interviewed the hunting party extensively. They separated the men, cross-referenced their timelines, and scrutinized their stories. They looked into Thomas's background, searching for any hidden conflicts, debts, or enemies. The investigation yielded nothing. The men in the hunting party were deeply traumatized by the loss of their friend and father. Their stories matched perfectly. Furthermore, the logistics of foul play in that specific scenario were impossible to reconcile. How could someone have murdered an armed man in the middle of a silent, dry forest with watchers only 50 yards on either side without making a sound? How could they have removed an 82-year-old body, a heavy hunting rifle, and all the gear without leaving a drop of blood, a drag mark, or a single footprint in the mud? There was no road access directly to the spot where he vanished, meaning no vehicle could have quickly snatched him away. The foul play theory, while investigated out of necessity, simply could not hold up against the physical reality of the woods. Weeks turned into months, and the brutal Adirondack winter locked the forest in deep snow and ice. The official search was eventually scaled back, transitioning from a rescue mission to a recovery operation. The spring thaw of 2016 brought renewed efforts. As the snow melted, rangers and volunteers returned to the Lily Pond tract, hoping that the receding snowpack would finally reveal Thomas's remains, or at least his rifle or orange vest. They scoured the area again, expanding the search radius even further. Still, Nothing was found. Years have passed since that November afternoon in 2015. Thomas Messick has never been found. Not a single piece of his clothing, not a fragment of his bone, not his two-way radio, and not his rifle have ever been recovered. When you strip away the massive scale of the search and look strictly at the raw facts of the disappearance, a deeply unsettling picture remains. An 82-year-old man with limited mobility and a bad heart vanished from a stationary position in a matter of an hour. He was bracketed by experienced hunters less than a football field away. The woods were dry, meaning any movement would have generated significant noise. He vanished without a sound. He vanished without leaving a scent trail for tracking dogs. He vanished without leaving a heat signature for infrared cameras. In the years since, the area around Lily Pond has remained quiet. Hunters still pass through, and hikers still walk the trails, but the shadow of 2015 lingers heavily over that specific patch of woods. Forest rangers who have spent their entire lives navigating the backcountry and who pride themselves on their ability to find anyone, anywhere, still speak of the Messick case with a quiet, lingering frustration. It is a case that defies the laws of physics and the predictable patterns of human behavior in the wilderness. When you stand on that old logging road today, surrounded by the towering pines and the dense, tangled underbrush, the silence of the Adirondacks feels different. It no longer feels peaceful. It feels heavy, observant, and profoundly secretive. The unsettling truth of the 2015 hunting trip is not just that a man went missing. People go missing in the vastness of nature all the time. The true horror lies in the realization of how he went missing. It is the chilling knowledge that a person can be completely surrounded by family and friends, armed, highly visible, and perfectly still, and yet, in the blink of an eye, the earth can simply open up and take them, leaving the rest of us to stare into the empty woods, listening to the silence, and wondering what is looking back.